All right, welcome. This is Senior English B, and our objective here is to be working with the poetry of Percy Bysshe Shelley. Now, I know that you've already looked on in your hymnal at page 846, 847. Let me make a suggestion to you. Before the examination that's coming, make sure on 847 that you've paid close attention at 2B to the literary analysis rhythmic pattern stuff that's listed there. Shelley is now our second of the second generation poets. Do you remember what we said about first generation, second generation? First generation, you remember the old farts, Wordsworth. You'll remember Coleridge, Burns, those guys. Our second generation are these young guns. The first we already studied. What was his name? Byron, Lord Byron, right? The second is this guy, Shelley. Who will the third be? We'll be introduced actually to him already because Keats, that's right, because we're already looking at a Keats poem later in the week for possible memorization when I have fears that I may cease to be, all right? Shelley now. Two things. One of the things that makes Shelley significantly important is that he is truly radical. In some ways, he's more radical than Byron. He writes the very first defense of atheism in Europe. And it's going to create a lot of controversy. Secondly, if you watch that video, you already know that this cat played around, right? The young lady who writes the novel Frankenstein is this guy's lover. Remember all of that? You watched from the video, okay? So Shelley's going to live a somewhat controversial life. He will die tragically young. How does he die? Did anybody read this in the biography to know how this guy dies? There was some mention of it, by the way, in the video. He drowns, doesn't he? Yeah, he's out on a little boat. When they pull him out of the water, he has something in his pocket that's kind of fascinating. It is a collection of poetry written by John Keats. It's kind of interesting. Shows his love of the poetry of Keats, a contemporary. The other thing is that his wife, soon to be, Shelley, does what as they burn his body on the side of the lake? Did you catch that from the video as well? What does she do? Rocklander, what does she do?
Pull his heart out.
She grabs his heart and takes it out of his chest, and then she keeps it for the rest of her life. Yeah, true love, I guess, you see. Sorry, giving your heart away. Sorry. So now let's Benitez. So now let's talk a little bit about the first of our offerings here, Percy Bysshe Shelley. Okay. The first thing we want to say at 2B, write it down in your notes. Again, we're now qualifying in-class notes and the like. The first thing that we want to point out is that this poem is what we call a sonnet. Now let's remind ourselves, what do we mean when we talk about a sonnet? What is that? A poem of how many lines? Let's start there. 14 lines. That's right. So for example, notice you got 14 lines here. We've also got end rhyme. What does that mean? Does anybody know what that means? The words, right, at the end of sentences or lines are going to rhyme with each other in a certain kind of rhyme scheme. So, for example, Mr. Harder, do you see that, for example, the last word of the first line is land? Notice the last word of the third line is sand. Do you see it? Rhymes. Do you see this? So there's going to be a game that gets played by poets where they will have a certain kind of rhyme scheme. The last thing is going to be some kind of internal rhythm as well, and we'll take a look at how that one works at this poem. Let's just read the poem, shall we? Ozymandias, read it with me. 848, all right? I met a traveler from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear, My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away." Now, let's begin by pointing out that Shelley is going to make a point in this poem that he never actually says. You want to write that down. Shelly is going to make a point in this poem that he never actually comes right out and says. It is a point that is implied, not directly stated. Secondly, this is a classic example of how you can write a poem and it has nothing to do with romantic love. We see a lot of sonnets that have to do with love. This is not one of those. Rather, this is a poem that's going to challenge us to think differently about a given idea, namely power. Power. And what do we mean when we even use that term? But the way Shelly sets this up is kind of fascinating. You've got Shelly, notice this, and you'll want to put this in your notes at 2B. You've got Shelly writing a poem, telling a story from another person. The other person's basically telling Shelly all this information. Notice the opening lines. He says, I'm at a traveler from an antique land. Do you have any guess for your notes what land this guy's come back from? Any guesses? Can anybody guess? Egypt, that's right, classic Egypt, okay? So you've got a guy who basically was out hanging out around Cairo. He comes back and he tells Shelly, dude, I just saw the most remarkable thing down outside of Cairo, in Egypt. And now he's going to say, down there in the desert, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. So he's like, the weirdest thing I saw down there, there's this huge monument, but the only part of the monument left standing is from the waist down. 2 huge legs are standing in the desert. Keep reading. Near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies. Uh-oh, if I'm driving in my truck and the sun is in my face, I put down my visor. It's the etymologically same word. Visage means your face. Your face. So this guy comes back from Egypt and he says, dude, I was down in the desert down there, and they got this statue that's only the legs of the statue remain standing. The face of the statue, notice some of the language, half sunk. Half sunk in what? Sand. Shattered visage. What does that mean, shattered? That's right. The monument of the face is already starting to break up. Later we'll hear the word decay. But notice he continues, the visage, a frown, a wrinkled lip, a sneer of cold command. What kind of a face, write it down in your notes, what kind of a face is this sculpture's face look like? Is it a happy, smiling face? Welcome to Cairo, or welcome to Egypt. No. What kind of face? How would you qualify it? Stern. I'm in control. Right? In fact, at line 6, the guy who comes back says, clearly, somebody had to sculpt this thing. Somebody had to carve this thing out of stone. And it says, that sculptor well, those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. All right? In other words, this guy, whoever this guy was, we're going to find out in a second who he was, this guy, he knew how to kick butt and take names. He didn't mess around. He was a serious leader, a serious commander. Then, notice we continue. On the pedestal, now what's a pedestal? Does anybody know what that is? What's the pedestal of this monument? At the base, right, the thing it's standing on. On the pedestal, these words appear. So now you have quotation marks. These are the only words on the pedestal. Here's what the words say. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Exclamation mark, quotation marks. At the bottom of this amazing statue, we find out who is responsible for making the statue and whose face it is. This cat's name is Ozymandias. Who was Ozymandias? Can you guess? He was a big-time, big-shot pharaoh. Down in Egypt, he built whole cities just for himself.
May I miss a second?
right? We're familiar, aren't we? Okay? This is a major, major political figure. What does his statue say? My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty other kings, and despair. What does the word despair mean?
Be sad. Suffer.
I'm number one. I'm number one with the big styrofoam finger. That's the point. I'm number one, right? All of you guys are losers. I'm number one. That's Ozymandias. Where is this? Written where?
On the pedestal.
On the pedestal of what?
Okay.
A statue that's what?
Okay.
Keep reading. Nothing beside remains. What does that mean? What happened to all of Ozymandias' works? God. Keep reading. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. Wait a minute. Harder kind of half smiles. We're dealing with a little bit of irony here, aren't we? Let's put it in our notes. There's clearly a little bit of irony here, isn't there? This great and magnificent king built all this stuff to himself. He left a monument that said, I'm number one, I'm number one. And the way you're going to know I'm number one is by looking at all the stuff I built. Where is all the stuff that he built?
Under the sun.
It's gone. It's gone. Where is it?
Under the sun.
The sand has covered it. It's gone. The only thing that remains of all the stuff that he built is this jacked up, decayed monument, half broken, where the head of Ozymandias is in fact laying on the ground, and now it's in the process of what? Being covered by sand. And the words, look on my works, ye mighty, and despair, all that's left. And Shelley finishes the sonnet by pointing out, that's all that's there. Noteless, boundless, and bare. There's nothing else there. It's all gone. Now that's the poem. We just worked level 1. Let's go to 2A now and ask a simple question. Is this a poem that simply tells about Ozymandias? Or is there something else going on here? Is Shelley, I'll ask it this way and then you could jot down a note or two, is Shelley making any kind of romantic observation here? And by romantic, back again, we're not talking about romance as in love. We're rather talking about romantic as in a certain kind of view of the world. What point is Shelley making by telling a poem, writing a poem, about this monument, this decaying monument? Anybody want to take a stab at this one?
Eventually you're going to forget about him.
Let's quote Marcus Aurelius, one of the great emperors of all time. Since we're quoting Ozymandias, we might as well quote a great Roman emperor, Marcus Aurelius. He said it this way, soon you will have forgotten all things, and all things will have forgotten you. What an interesting line, Mr. Keeley. Soon you will have forgotten. This is Marcus Aurelius. At the time he wrote these words, he was the most powerful man on the planet. He ruled the Roman Empire, the greatest empire of the world. And he wrote to himself this note in his meditations. Soon you will have forgotten all things, and all things will have forgotten you. That's kind of a 3A observation, isn't it? I'm making a relationship. Correct? Mr. Nelson, how does that quote from Marcus Aurelius work with this poem, Ozymandias?
Ozymandias thought he was so powerful and had created all these massive cities, but eventually it was all gone and nobody remembered it.
Gone. Notice the opening line. I met a traveler from an old, ancient. It's gone. He ain't around no more. Why did he build all those monuments? What was the point of building all those huge cities and all that stuff? Why would he do that? So he could be remembered. You bet. People would look, oh, Ozymandias isn't with us anymore, but at least all that stuff he built's still here. Gone. The only thing remaining now is a statue that's darkly ironic because the statue was left as a reminder of all the stuff he built, and now Shelly says, all gone. What are your thoughts on this? I remember years ago I was making this observation. I said, don't you find it fascinating that there are athletes at Orland High School who work so hard to get their picture on a piece of cardboard stuck out here in this cabinet, right? And yet, there is this reality. If you could forecast far enough, I mean, come on. There's so many students that are going to come through Orland High School that are going to have their pictures on cardboard that sooner or later there isn't going to be enough room in those cabinets for the old ones. So those old ones are obviously going to have to be taken out, put inside of some box. That box is going to be put inside of some janitor's closet. Then many, many years later, some janitor is going to come in there, open the box. What are those? I don't know. It's just some old stuff. Toss it. And I'm making this observation. And all of a sudden it hits me that while I'm making this observation, there's a student athlete sitting in my room whose picture's 3 times already in that cabinet. And he has the strangest look on his face. I go, you all right, bro? And he's like, I never thought of it that way. But it's already true. When you guys go to, for example, a football game and they have the old-timers stand up, and one of these old guys is like got to have his walker to like help him, you know, he like stands up, and somebody else old says, oh man, you should have seen that guy when he was 18. Phenomenal athlete. Now you look at him, he just looks like this, right? What is the romantic observation that's being made here about life? Jot it down. What is the point that's being made about life? What are we saying, Mr. Durant, about life in this poem? What do you think?
Everything we work for in the end won't matter.
We work really hard to accomplish things, but in the end it's pretty easy for us to as well be kind of forgotten. Now, question, how do you keep from getting depressed at an observation like that? Wait a minute, who won in this poem? Who won in this poem? It's right there, the final 2 lines. Round the decay of this colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level. Who won?
Nature.
Mr. Rothleutner saying, oh, there's that romantic observation about nature. 1,000 years after you're dead and gone, few people will probably recall your name. Those mountains you look at every morning when you come out of this building, still going to be there. Or at least that's the assumption. They were there 1,000 years ago. They probably will be there 1,000 years from now. You won't. That is a very romantic observation. That the forces of nature can teach humans something about the idea of ambition and fame. As Mr. Durant pointed out, it's kind of short-lived. Now let's point out something about Shelly. Shelly, as a romantic writer, he loves this kind of stuff, where he starts with something simple in nature, and then he makes really interesting observations that are personal to human readers. No poem Shelly ever wrote does this better than Ode to the West Wind. So let's go to that one now. I'm on page 850 with you now. Now, I want to point out a few things to help you read this poem. By the way, I got about, I think, 20 questions on the exam from this poem. If you don't know this poem, you're going to flunk the exam. So that's why I'm spending some time now with you going over this poem, all right? And because it's on video at Learn Strong, you can always go back and restudy this the night before the exam if you feel like you need to hear this information again. The first thing I want to point out about this poem is that it is an essay. It's a poetic essay. Notice it's divided up into parts. This is huge. Do you see this? Ms. Padilla, do you notice, for example, on page 850, that Roman numeral 1? It's in blue. Do you see it? And then after a few lines, you have Roman numeral 2. And then do you see on 851, Ms. Keller, Roman numeral 3? Do you see that? And then Roman numeral 4 at the bottom of 851. And then Roman numeral 5, Cruz Nicholas, on page 852. Do you see that? So let's say something really quickly for your notes at 2B. This is a poem of 5 parts, and you want to recognize it as such, all right? So, Mr. Lang, what you want to understand is that the poem is divided into 5 parts. So you want to ask this question, what's happening in each one of these parts? What's happening in each one of these parts? Okay? Secondly, to be. I'm going to test you here, Ramos, to see if you were listening earlier. This poem is what we call an apostrophe. Don't say it, write it. This poem is what we call an apostrophe, a to be. What does that mean? No, I know what grammatically an apostrophe is, but remember we said we use this word differently. At 3A, can you jot down the poem that we've already seen that was an apostrophe? Is anybody paying attention enough to know what I'm talking about?
Ancient Mariner.
Nope. Ancient Mariner is not an apostrophe.
Can I tell you what an apostrophe is?
What is an apostrophe, Mr. Lang?
It's when you write a poem to something in nature as if it was a person.
There you go. You're writing, speaking directly to an inanimate object as if it is real. And notice Miss Keller flipping back because she remembers, oh yeah, we did some poem and it was? You got it. That Byron poem, it's an apostrophe to what? The ocean. Yeah, now we're going to see that on this exam. So just to remind you, Byron's poem to the ocean. Now, notice, we're not getting a poem to the ocean. We're on page 850. Now, we're getting a poem to what? To the wind. Not just any wind. What wind? The west wind. Yeah, the west wind. We'll have to define what that is. Now, let me help you read this. Number 3. Again, the first is it's a 5-part poem. Secondly, it's an apostrophe. So you've got a guy speaking, Shelly, speaking directly to the wind. Number 3, in each one of the 5 parts, he says something about the wind, and he says something to the wind. Write it down. This is really important. In each one of the 5 parts, he says something about the wind, and he says something to the wind. Now, if you know what those 2 things are for all 5 parts, you'll know this poem. All right? You'll know this poem. And you'll do fine on the exam with the questions. Again, a 5-part poem. It's an apostrophe. Right? Only notice the word here is an apostrophe. What's our word at 2B? It's right there in the title. An ode. O-D-E. Write it down at 2B. An ode is an apostrophe. Just another word for it. It is a poem spoken directly to an inanimate object, in this case the wind, before it was the ocean. We're going to see a number of these odes, all right, by the Romantics. They love them. Finally, we're going to ask, what is it that's being said about the wind in all 5 parts, and then spoken to the wind? There is a request. Let's write it as that. Let's say it as that. There is a request to the wind in all 5 parts. What request does Shelley make? Again, if you know that information for each one of the 5 parts, you're going to know this poem very well. Question, observation, Nelson.
Is an ode always to an inanimate object? Because I've heard poems like an ode to a brother or...
That's right. That's right. So apostrophe is to an inanimate object. An ode is simply a kind of a tribute poem, we might say, a request poem, a celebration, often to an inanimate object. Not always. Often to an inanimate object. Keats will write a very famous ode on a Grecian urn, a vase. We'll get to that one. And after we do that one, you'll understand that comic somebody stuck on my front door of my room, right? You'll be able to understand that finally once you know that poem. Let's take a look at this poem now. Read with me. I'm on 850 now. Where, again, guys, hello. Just to remind you, we're learning how to read. I'm really happy that you're learning about English poets and romantics and all that. But I want to refocus you. I'm teaching you how to read. Those of you who are college bound, you're sitting in your dorm late at night, you've got a major assignment the next day, you got to get that history read all on your own. How will you do it? That's what we're focused on here. Well, another way to say this is, if you can read this crap and figure it out, you can pretty much read all the psych and history and mathematics they're going to give you at university. Notice how we start. A little bit of background. Now we're actually going to read the thing. Then we'll begin the process of exegesis. We'll have to obviously finish most likely tomorrow this text. Let's take a look at the poem. Let's hear it read. While I read, you follow along. See if that helps you at all. I will not, however, differentiate parts. So I'm not going to say part 1, part 2. I'm just going to read, okay? Percy Bysshe Shelley's Ode to the West Wind. O wild west wind, thou breath of autumn's being, thou from whose unseen presence the leaves dead are driven like ghosts from an enchanter fleeing. Yellow and black and pale and hectic red, pestilence-stricken multitudes. O thou who charitest to their dark wintry bed the winged seeds, where they lie cold and low, each like a corpse within its grave, until thine azure sister of the spring shall blow her clarion over the dreaming earth, and fill driving sweet buds like flocks to feed in air, with living hues and odors, plain and hill. Wild spirit, which art moving everywhere, destroyer and preserver, hear, O hear, thou on whose stream, mid the steep sky's commotion, loose clouds, like earth's decaying leaves, are shed, shook from the tangled bough of heaven and ocean, angels of rain and lightning, there are spread on the blue surface of thine airy surge like the bright hair uplifted from the head of some fierce Maenad, even from the dim verge of the horizon to the zenith's height, the locks of the approaching storm. Thou, dirge of the dying year, to which this closing night will be the dome of a vast sepulchre, vaulted with all thy congregated might of vapors, from whose solid atmosphere black rain and fire and hail will burst. O hear! Thou who didst waken from his summer dreams the blue Mediterranean, where he lay, lulled by the coil of his crystalline streams, beside a pumice isle in Bai's Bay, and saw in sleep old palaces and towers quivering within the waves' intenser day, all overgrown with azure moss and flowers so sweet, the sense faints picturing them. Thou, for whose path the Atlantic's level powers cleave themselves into chasms, while far below the sea blooms and the oozy woods which wear the sapless foliage of the ocean know thy voice, and suddenly grow gray with fear, and tremble, and despoil themselves. O hear! If I were a dead leaf, thou mightst spare. If I were a swift cloud to fly with thee, a wave to pant beneath thy power and share the impulse of thy strength, only less free than thou, O uncontrollable. If even I were as in my boyhood, and could be the comrade of thy wanderings over heaven, as then when to outstrip thy sky speed scarce seemed a vision, I would ne'er have striven as thus with thee in prayer in my sore need. O lift me as a wave, a leaf, a cloud. I fall upon the thorns of life. I bleed. A heavy weight of hours has chained and bowed one too like thee, tameless and swift and proud. Make me thy lyre, even as the forest is. What if my leaves are falling like its own? The tumult of thy mighty harmonies will take from both a deep, autonomal tone, sweet though in sadness. Be thou spirit fierce, my spirit. Be thou me, impetuous one. Drive my dead thoughts over the universe like withered leaves to quicken a new birth, and by the incantation of this verse, scatter as from an extinguished hearth ashes and sparks my words among mankind. Be through my lips to unawakened earth the trumpet of a prophecy. O wind, if winter comes, can spring be far behind? Now let's, again, make an observation. When we get ready to exegete this poem, we want to, again, make 2 points. Again, for your notes. 1, as you look at each one of these 5 parts, you will want to ask, what is it, specifically, that Shelley is emphasizing about the wind? The wind. And then secondly, what request does he make to the wind? Again, if you know those 2 things, you'll know this poem. Now, I can lecture this poem much easier to you than I can to many other kinds of students, and here's why. At least some of you will admit that already, now, you're beginning to feel a different kind of breeze, a wind. What's the difference between the wind now and the wind that you will feel as seniors in April, May?
One will be carried with reading.
The one in April, May obviously puts us closer to graduation day, and therefore there will be a whole different feeling, no doubt. Is there anything, though, literally different about those two winds? Now, I've had students that say the wind of October is the same kind of wind of April. But I've had other students that spend more time outside, and they say it's not the same wind. It's a different kind of wind. What's the wind of fall? What is the wind of October?
Like a moisture. Heavy.
It is. It's a heavier wind. There's obviously a different kind of moisture coming with it. When the wind of autumn, see, those of us who hunt, we know this all too well. There's a huge difference between being on the mountain, for example, in October, and being on the mountain in May, June. It's a whole different kind of wind. Both times the wind blows, but the wind is different. Question for your notes: which one of the two winds is the west wind? Is it the wind of October, or is it the wind of May? And go ahead and look at the opening stanza to see it. The very first line will tell you, So right away, notice we've already identified what kind of wind we're looking at. Mr. Ramos, this is the wind, the wild west wind. Notice first line, breath of autumn. Right? It is, isn't it? So in other words, this is the right time to be reading this poem, right? This is the right time to be reading this poem. So as we look at this poem, and when you come back tomorrow, as we get ready to exegete, if you have already written this information down in your notes, you will be very well served. As we start to talk about two things. What does he say about the wind in each one of the 5 parts? He emphasizes something special about the wind. 2, he makes a request to the wind. He makes a request to the wind in each one of the parts. What is that request? Once we know those two things, we'll be good to go. Finally, go ahead and review as well to a skylark. This will allow for you to be able to as well be ready for our discussion coming. Yes? Questions, comments? Okay, I will